Welcome to everybody on behalf of the Union for Mediterranean to today's event. I'm truly honored to be with you today, moderating this event that has been organized in cooperation with several international organizations in order to jointly celebrate the International Women's Day 2021. We are pleased to have on board today a variety of stakeholders from across sectors who will analyze the gender barriers to leadership and to share good practice on how to foster women leadership across the Euro-Mediterranean region. Based on the outcomes of the International Women Conference organized by the UfM in November 2020, we decided to focus the event of today on three main topics: women in business, entrepreneurship and digital economy, women in agriculture, and women in the healthcare sector. I would like to invite you to share your question and your comment to this interactive dialogue through our question and answer option and to our digital platform on the one of our partners, and to use our hashtag, as you can see on the video. But let me first give the floor for her opening remarks to Ambassador Marisa Farrugia, Deputy Secretary General of the Social and Civil Affairs Division of the Union for the Mediterranean. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear online participants, good morning to everybody. Allow me to warmly welcome you all to this UfM webinar, particularly the European Commission, our partners and speakers for today's event. We are honored to have you joining us online, and I am confident that your valuable contributions and exchanges will leave all of us with further questions, more innovative solutions, and best practice to bridge the leadership gap in the region. We chose to hold today's webinar, among other objectives, to commemorate the International Women's Day. Over 100 years ago, women across the world began to protest and march to claim the right to suffrage, the right to equal pay and better working conditions. In other words, to claim equal rights to men. The hardships that women around the globe experience are not by a chance or by coincidence, but rather based on structural inequalities. We note that the situation for women empowerment has improved, but progress has been too little and too slow. Many challenges remain ahead to achieve gender parity, and all of them have now been exacerbated by the current COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has taken a great toll on our societies, our lives, and economy. Evidence shows that the impacts of crisis are never gender neutral, and COVID-19 is no exception. The milestone strides made in the past decades are now at risk of being rolled back. In the midst of a global pandemic, we hope that this webinar serves as a reminder to assess the progress made in advancing gender equality and women's leadership in the region, but also of all the work that still needs to be done. As healthcare and agricultural workers, nurses, or caregivers, women have worked relentlessly, not only to fight COVID-19, but also to shape a more equal and inclusive future and pandemic recovery. However, we are noticing that while women have been in the front line of the fight against the pandemic, their voices remain ignored and left out of the decision-making bodies. Faced with this unacceptable reality, and in line with the UN Women's Theme for this year's International Women's Day, Women in Leadership, Achieving an Equal Future in a COVID-19 World, holding this webinar is important to highlight the multi-phase challenges that women continue to face to reach an equal future. This month of March will also host the Commission on the Status of Women, the principal global intergovernmental body exclusively dedicated to the promotion of gender equality and the empowerment of women, established in 1946. The priority theme for 2021 is the women's full and effective participation and decision-making in public life, as well as the elimination of violence for achieving gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls. Gender equality is not only a fundamental human right, but an indication of prosperity in our societies. Women empowerment is the precondition for sustainable societies and stronger economies. The UfM has always put gender equality and women's empowerment at the heart of its agenda. This agenda was notably endorsed by the 4th Ministerial Cairo Declaration on Strengthening the Role of Women in Society in 2017, which identified 4 priority areas, one of which is strengthening women's access to leadership and decision-making positions. To operationalize this agenda, the UfM member states committed to a unique set of 20 indicators to gather data, monitor progress, evaluate the gender gap, and inform policy and decision-making both in the public and private sectors. Through this mechanism, the UfM recognizes the importance to invest in women and create a gender-equal business ecosystem. Among these 20 indicators, 3 focus on the women's access to leadership and decision-making priority area. These indicators were presented during the Women Regional Dialogue meeting, which had over 80 participants who agreed on the importance of harmonization and standardization of available data. This meeting was convened back-to-back with the Women for Mediterranean Conference last year in November. With regards to women's leadership, the high-level conference provided further evidence that women are at the forefront of the battle against the pandemic, risking their lives to save others. To give an example, out of all nurses who represent 95% of health professionals, 80% are female. Yet, this crisis has shown that the decision-making bodies, including those established specifically to manage the pandemic, do not reflect a gender balance. According to Women in Global Health, 85% of 114 national COVID-19 task forces are mostly male. Hence, we have male-led response delivered by women. Other priorities identified by experts during the Women Conference in the agricultural sector were the need to nurture collaboration and partnerships, bottom-up policies and actions, better data, closing the digital gap, and the involvement of grassroots organizations and civil society to address the gender impacts of the pandemic. In other words, a sustainable pandemic recovery should be based on a thorough understanding of how COVID-19 has impacted gender roles with the necessity to engaging rural women in the response design. These main takeaways from the UfM Women High-Level Conference served as a follow-up inspiration for today's webinar. Through the pressing topics of entrepreneurship and digitalization, food security, and healthcare, Today's webinar will host discussions on the gender barriers to leadership and how to foster women and girls leadership across the Euro-Mediterranean region. The valuable interventions of our high-level speakers, as well as the question and answer session during the panels, will certainly contribute to our rich debate. To uphold women's rights and fully leverage the potential of women's leadership in pandemic preparedness and response, the perspectives of women and girls in all of their diversity must be integrated in the formulation and implementation of policies and programs in the entire spheres and at all stages of the pandemic response and recovery. Our region is weakened by the exclusion of women's talent and knowledge. In order to achieve the SDGs in 2030, a transformative gender agenda that places women at the same level with men is needed. COVID-19 has placed the issue of gender parity at the back burner. It is important not to compromise gender equality in the midst of a global crisis. Doing so will have devastating consequences for women and girls. Gender equality must remain a priority and also high on national and regional agendas. Once again, thank you all for your participation, and I wish you a constructive and fruitful dialogue. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ambassador Farrugia, for your valuable opening remarks. You mentioned the need to work on strategy and national regional level, and now we will see how this need is applicable also at international and global level. I have now the pleasure to introduce to you Mrs. Olga Martin Gonzalez, who is the Gender Equality Coordinator at DG NEAR, Neighborhood Enlargement, Directorate General of the European Commission, that will present and share with us the new European strategy on gender and the Gender Action Plan 2021-2025 for the European external action. Mrs. Martin Gonzalez, the floor is yours.
Hi, good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation. Yes, I will briefly, present you a new gender equality strategy that it was recently approved, last year in November, that has been aligned, with the EU priorities and policies that we have already in place, like, for example, the EU Gender Equality Strategy that covers the period 2020-2025. The Women's Peace and Security Action Plan has been integrated for the first time into this Gender Equality Action Plan. It has been broadly, consulted. We had consultations with many different stakeholders, with the EU delegations, with member states, with UN agencies, civil society organizations has been also organized because, as you know, the Gender Action Plan is not only, for all the Commission services that we are working, that we have external actions, but it's also applicable, for all the member states that they are working in the partner countries. So it has been built as well, this gender equality strategy, on the lesson learned from the previous Gender Action Plan 2. And the fundings has been integrated, the fundings of this evaluation, and also regarding, the COVID-19, the impact and recovery, it has been integrated into this new Gender Action Plan. So that's why we have new elements that they were not covered before based on these developments. So the strategy, the Gender Action Plan is composed, we have one communication, and then we have the STAT working document that is divided in two parts. The first part is like the institutional framework. So what it's mentioned, all the strategic objectives and the indicators, so for example, related to how we are going to achieve, gender equality, gender mainstreaming, the targeted actions, also the importance of the strategic engagement at different levels, at local level, regional, international, how is going to be the reporting, the responsibility of each of the actors, etc. And the second part of the document is related with the objectives and indicators on the thematic areas of engagement, that we have 6 instead of 3 that we used to have under the previous Gender Action Plan. So for each of the objectives, we have each of the thematic areas, we have objectives and a selection of indicators that the delegations and the member states will have also to select which are going to be the priorities in each of the countries, and how we are going to do also the reporting. So the Gender Action Plan is structured in 5 pillars. The first one is related to the engagement of gender equality and women's empowerment in order to be more effective. And here, the main key area with gender mainstreaming, we continue with the target of 80% of all the actions that we will identify will be scoring according to the OECD gender marker G1 or G2. Roughly, this is the data that we have from 2000. The latest data that we have is that we are now around 64% of all all of actions are targeting gender equality. The second pillar, for example, is regarding to the strategic engagement at the different levels and how we are going, the importance of coordination and also cooperation in the field. The third pillar is the 6 key areas of engagement that I will present, later. The fourth pillar, we used to call it, the institutional cultural shift, and now it's called EU Leads by Example. So here, we have all the elements regarding, the gender responsive, gender balanced institution, the importance of leadership within our institution. And the fifth pillar is regarding the accountability. We are going to simplify the reporting, and we need to communicate better. The results that has been achieved, in order to get better transparency as well. So the first pillar, the effectiveness of EU engagement for gender equality, the key principles will be tackling, the root causes of inequality. So we will have to adopt, make sure that all the actions have a gender transformative approach, really to transfer, the gender power relations. Within this gender action plan, intersectionalities, it is really highlighted, because it is very important, how gender interacts, with other characteristics as race, age, religion, etc. And we will also adopt a rights-based approach that is building on the human rights framework. In this regard, a toolbox on rights-based approach and gender mainstreaming will be approved in the next months, by the Council, that will help us on how to mainstream, both approaches, gender mainstreaming and rights-based approach into the actions. We will continue with the 3-pronged strategic approach. So we will work at 3 levels. We have to mainstream gender in the political dialogue. In all the actions, in the programming, we will continue with gender mainstreaming, making more emphasis on blending operations, on gender responsive budgeting, and we will continue with the targeted actions as well. So as I mentioned, we have the 2 targets for gender mainstreaming. G1 and G2 is the 80%, 85%, but we will have to, we have also a target that we have to increase the funding compared what we had before. And so, in all the countries, they should have at least, a G2 transformative action, and at least every year they need to have a one high-level dialogue that is focused on gender equality. So what is important is that we are going to continue. I mean, the gender analysis, I mean, is key. So every country, they should have every delegation an updated gender analysis, but also a sector gender analysis for all the priority sectors that they are going to be selected by the delegation and the member states. The importance, I mean, of the gender sensitive and also sex segregated indicators. And we will continue asking, I mean, once if an action is not contributing to gender equality, they need to provide, I mean, a robust justification why that program is scoring 0 in order to avoid that. So the second pillar is about the strategic engagement at the 3 levels, I mean, at country and regional, but also multilateral level. The new element that we have compared with the previous gap is the country level implementation plans. So this is a document, it's going to be a live document that will have the delegations, they have to finalize the document by July, they have to send it to headquarters, and they will provide in 2023, they will provide an updated version as well. And this document must be done in coordination with the member states, but also with consultation with women's organization, with the national government, in order to identify which are going to be the main areas of work under the period of the Gender Action Plan 3, which are going to be the objectives, even, I mean, the indicators, so how they are going to work in each country, how they are going to translate, I mean, or general strategy at country level. So another element that is also important is that under this gender action plan is the partnership that we are going to establish, I mean, with the different stakeholders and also at different levels. So the third pillar is the thematic areas of engagement. As I mentioned, I mean, under the previous gender action plan 3, the 2, we used to have only 3 areas. And now we have 6. So we have incorporated, I mean, the issues of green transition and digitalization, because it has been also highlighted in the EU gender equality strategy. And we have integrated, I mean, the issue of women's peace and security. The area of sexual and reproductive health, it used to belong to the first pillar before, but now it has its own pillar, and it's also midstream across the different pillars, I mean, this area. So for example, the first pillar, the first thematic area, that is ensuring freedom from all births of forms of gender-based violence. I mean, we are going to continue working, I mean, on the legislative framework. I mean, we need to continue working, I mean, in the increase of the access of essential services. I mean, the full control also by women and girls to decide freely on their sexuality and sexual and reproductive health and rights, on the access to socioeconomic and psychological support, on issues on sexual and gender-based violence in fragile and humanitarian crisis situations, I mean, etc. So these are the specific objectives that under each of the thematic areas they have, and then you have the indicators in the document, a selection of indicators under each specific thematic objectives that each delegation they will choose and they will have to report on. The second pillar, I mean, the promotion of sexual and reproductive health, it also deals with the enabling environment at the legal level, the political level, and also the improvement of the access to the services. The third pillar, I mean, the promotion of the economic and social rights and empowering women. Also, we are continue working on issues on decent work. I mean, the improving also the policy and legal framework in order to access to the care services, to access to finance services and products, the access to entrepreneurship, to managerial and leadership roles also. Improve the access to safe and water and sanitation facilities, for example. Regarding the fourth pillar, that is the promotion of equal participation and leadership, I mean, here as well, I mean, the specific thematic objectives are firstly, I mean, enable the conditions for women to participate in decision making, in the decision making of the different bodies, improve also the access to justice, and also to work, I mean, on the gender norms, in the attitudes and behaviors in order to promote, I mean, the equal participation and leaderships. No, and also we need to improve, I mean, and continue the collection of data, disaggregated data, and we have to improve the systems, I mean, in order to have a comparable data regarding, I mean, this concrete area. The fifth pillar is regarding issues of women's peace and security. So this is their strategy, I mean, the thematic justice that they have, because what we used to do is they used to have their own strategy, I mean, the women's peace and security, and the reports, we collected the information jointly, but we used to have two different reports, and now it's going to be integrated, I mean, as I mentioned, for the first time. And the sixth thematic area, as I mentioned, these are the two new areas that has been mentioned in the EU gender equality strategy. So it's the green transition and the digital transformation. So the fourth pillar of the gender action plan is the EU leads by example. So here we have three areas. The first one is regarding, I mean, the improvement of the capacities and also the ownership. So we need to continue, I mean, building the capacity of the states by training, doing more analysis, more research, the knowledge shares with the member states and also with the international organizations. We have to strengthen, I mean, the capacity and the role of the gender focal points and the network that we have in place. And for example, regarding the gender responsive leadership, this has been found out also to be very, I mean, a key element in order to move, I mean, the gender equality agenda. We will have mandatory trainings for all the management, including the head of the delegations. This is a novelty compared to the previous gap. And also, I mean, gender equality and women's empowerment is going to be assessed in the performer assessments. And this was not also done before. And we will continue working on the gender parity in order to achieve a gender balance for managers. Regarding the third pillar is around, I mean, the accountability, so how we are going to do the monitoring and reporting. So the internal pillar, we are going to do it on annual basis, and we will streamline, I mean, all the mechanisms that we have in place already for the annual reporting. So we have, I mean, surveys, a specific surveys for this and instruments. And regarding the thematics, we will do it only twice. So in 2023, we will have a midterm report on the GAT3 on all the key areas. And we will have an intern report on the key areas of results with the lesson learned and the promising practice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gonzalez, for this, for sharing this interesting overview on this ambitious youth strategy on the external action. Take into account the impact of COVID-19 outbreak in the Mediterranean region. This strategy focusing on overall external relations of the European Union with also their southern neighbor will be quite crucial. Let me also point out that I'm glad to read and to listen that most of the priorities set up in the pillars of the strategy are in line with the priority areas set up in the UfM Cairo Declaration mentioned earlier by Ambassador Farrugia, and the four priorities areas like the women leadership, the women economic empowerment, but also the violence against women. And as you spot, the data gathering monitoring is why it's quite a key element to be taken into account. I would like just to check if we have a question from the public. We have more comments in terms of highlighting the need of drafting targeted policies, but also gender mainstream policies for all the Mediterranean region. And I would like to ask you a more concrete question about the upcoming implementation of this strategy. Which are the financial instruments the European Commission will use to implement it?
Yes, regarding, the financial instruments, we will have, the NDICI, that is the new instrument. It's Neighborhood Development and International Cooperation Instrument. So the Southern region, it was funded before through the ENI, we used to call it, no? So now this is the new instrument for the programming period 2021-2027. And the priority areas include, human development, social inclusion, gender equality, climate change, environmental protections, migration issues, etc. So this instrument, will support, especially in regard to the Sustainable Development Goals, the 2030 Agenda, and the Paris Agreement. So the instrument, what has done is to merge, the previous instrument that they were under the previous MFF, the 2014-2020, into one single instrument. So in order to increase, the flexibility and simplify also the process. So it combines, for example, the European Development Fund, the European Neighborhood Instrument, that it was key, in your region, and other instruments. So this is going to be, for the Southern and Eastern Partnership region. So you have, there is also a geographic cooperation, and there are thematic programs that they will focus on the human rights and democracy, and issues on global challenges. And here inside the global challenges, it is mentioned, for example, the Green Deal, the digital and data technology, migration, and also human development. And inside this area, it is mentioned, it is specifically dealing with health issues, education, gender equality, social protection, etc. And then, so we have this instrument, but it's going to be complemented by the instrument of pre-accession. And this is what we have now, for the enlargement region, West Balkans and Turkey. And this instrument as well, it has different thematic windows. For example, rule of law, fundamental rights, democracy, where gender, is included, but also it's mainstream. It has been mainstream across the different windows. So that will be the two main instruments that we will have in the year.
Perfect. Thanks a lot for your answer. And the last question is about the concept and the dimension of partnership that you mentioned in your presentation. What kind of role do you think the private sector should play in the implementation of this strategy? Because you mentioned the civil society organization, of course, but also the private sector. What do you think?
Yeah. Yes, as I mentioned, partnerships is going to be key in this gender action plan. Now, for example, the delegations, they have to provide these country level implementation plans by July in coordination with the member states and other stakeholders that they are operating in the country. So private sector, it's a paramount, it's key, and they play a paramount role, in the inclusive recovery, for example, now, in the business sector. And also they can promote a key role in the promotion of inclusive employment, in social economy, and in the green and digital transition, for example, no? So their role is really key. As is going to be with other, as we will work, for example, with women's rights organizations, but the private sector, they have a key role in the promotion of gender equality and also in the business and human rights standards, because we have to contribute to the promotion, for example, of decent work, on the equal pay, the labor rights, the women transition from the informal to the formal economy, in order to, to boost women leadership. So the private sector, they really have a key role, in all this regard.
Thank you very much for your valuable feedback. Really much appreciate. And I would now go to the thematic panels, and without taking out any precious time to the agenda, I will give the floor to the moderator of the panel one, focus on women in business, entrepreneurship and digital economy. Mrs. Boutiba, General Secretary of Business Med, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anna. Hope you hear me well. Good morning, all. Welcome to all the speakers and all the virtual audience. So thank you for joining us today on this very interesting panel, which will be focusing on women in business, entrepreneurship, and digital economy. So just to present myself, I'm Jeanne Boutiba, the General Secretary of Business Med, which is Euro-Mediterranean Employers Organization, and I will be moderating this session with the 3 panelists. I welcome the audience to send their question via chat box. So concerning the subject, we can see that the impact of COVID-19 across the global economy is already profound, with markets and supply chains that has been disrupted, businesses closed, and millions of people have or will lose their jobs. So emerging evidence suggested that women will be affected disproportionately. Although the pandemic has some serious economic consequences, it has also underlined the growth in this digital industry. As more cutting-edge technology transforms the way of doing business, developing digital economy has a positive spillover effect on the entire economic landscape of the region. The emerging digital structure can help gender giving women the possibility to earn additional income, increase their employment opportunities, and access knowledge and information. So our panelists will share with us their work and perception on the impact of COVID-19 on women-owned businesses and female entrepreneurship, while assessing the impact that digitalization can have on women and girls to access leadership position and financial inclusion, and also how they evaluate the role of digital technology in rebuilding our economies, and how women entrepreneurs and business owners can lead the way. So allow me to introduce our first panelist, Mr. Carlos Conde, which is he's the head of the Middle East and Africa division in the Global Relations Secretariat of OECD. On his capacity, he leads the implementation of the MENA OECD initiative on governance and competitiveness for development. Mr. Conde, just 2 questions, but indeed you feel free to open your presentation. What structural factors and barriers pre-pandemic hindering women's participation in the region labor market, including in leadership position? Which measures have been or known or need to be implemented to promote women's economic contribution, and how gender perspective be integrated in the regional policy response? And also, what is the role of digitalization, particularly in this period of COVID-19? What measures can be implemented to address and improve women's digital skills, to harness the potential for the region's labor market and ensure that women and girls are not left out, its spillover effect on the region development? Mr. Conde, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jehan. It's a pleasure being in a panel moderated by you, and let me start also by thanking the Union for the Mediterranean and Ambassador Ferrugi for this opportunity. It's indeed a very important celebration, and is the right way to do, mobilizing a very large community of stakeholders to discuss about these important issues, and also how to work together to make a difference in the short, the mid, and the long term. Thank you for your questions, Jehan, which indeed are very relevant in the Mediterranean region. from the perspective of the women empowerment and the opportunities for women, but also from the perspective of the overall economic development of the region and how to build economies that are more efficient and deliver more welfare. You were asking about the structural conditions in terms of participation of women in the economic activity. And it is very well known, but the first thing that we have to say is that this economic participation is very low. And is very low in a way that is really not sustainable to build a strong economy for the future. In the MENA region, the average women labor participation is only of 19.77% in 2019. This is the lowest in the world. But also what we see is that the tendency is to grow, but very, very, very slowly. So important changes need to take place really to catch up. But there is another dimension that also is the title of our panel that we think is very important, which is women entrepreneurship and the capacity and the participation of women in entrepreneurial activities. Then again, the percentage of adult women in the Mediterranean countries participating in entrepreneurial activities is the lowest in the world. So really we are talking about a structural situation that requires important attention to be changed. What are the factors that explain this situation? Let me underline some of them, but especially the factors in which we are working in order to introduce some differences. One aspect that we think is always important to underline is legal discrimination and legal frameworks. We are still talking about countries and societies where legal equality has not been achieved, and there are still important discriminations. Of course, we cannot talk about all the countries as if they were homogeneous. The situations are very different, and we can find very important differences. And then there is another important message is that there is momentum for reform, and we see in all the countries there are progressive reforms that are taking place. This said, the situation is still worrisome. So sometimes women have not a full contractual capacity, for example, and they, when they contract, they hire a contract, they need a co-signature. Sometimes conditions for access to credit are different. Sometimes the capacity to administer the family assets are different. All this comes from the legal frameworks that establish these discriminations, and we think this is an important aspect that should be tackled. Then there is a second element that it's a paradox in the region, in the sense that we know that the levels of education have improved in a very, very impressive manner during the last years, even decades in the region. However, this is not translated into more participation in the economic activities. So we can think that there are some gaps in the transition from school to work. Also, that there is some problem maybe in the skills that are acquired in the education system. Third factor is not only about women, but is only about the private sector overall. We need to understand that we are talking about the low level of economic participation of women, but also the participation of men is lower in the region than in the rest of the world. And one explanation of this is the insufficiency of the private sector to deliver the necessary jobs. We are talking, again, in general terms, about countries where the role of the public sector is still very prominent. There is a very clear preference, especially for women, to work for the public sector, not for the private sector. And then we see that the size of the formal private sector is very limited. And what we have is a very, very vast private sector. What we see is that the participation of women in the formal private sector is really very, very limited. Then, of course, there are conditions that are general to all the world that maybe are a bit more severe in the region, as the lack of family-friendly policies, the support to better work-life balance that still need some attention. You were talking about, asking about the impact of COVID-19. And of course, the impact has been very, very serious given the social and economic crisis that came related to the pandemic. Of course, women, as it was already mentioned by Ambassador Ferrugia, have suffered 2 times the pandemic, in the sense that there are some elements that are well known, so additional care work during the crisis, given to the family practices. But there are 2 aspects more related to the labor market that I would like to underline. One is, as I mentioned, the especially severe impact of the pandemic on the informal economy. So the restrictive conditions, lockdowns, etc., have damaged particularly the informal workers that are not covered, but schemes of social security, for example. So this is very predominant in women. But then there is a very important industry for the countries that has been particularly damaged, and this is tourism. And we know that there is a very important presence of women in the tourism instrument. Then not everything I would say is, in the pandemic, we have also observed some elements that invite to some extent to optimism. And we have seen, for example, we were discussing our colleague from the European Union about the mainstreaming policies, and we have seen that in the policy response of most of the countries in the region, the responses to the crisis have been genderized to some extent. And this is good news because it shows that the way of doing policy is improving and is taking bringing more attention to the importance of giving specific policy responses to women. Some countries have created interministerial committees, crisis management units to define their responses on the sanitary conditions, on the financial support to enterprises, on the different aspects of the economic impact, and the women's institutions are already in these efforts. And we have seen that some countries have really tried to look from a gender angle to the economic impact. And we have also seen in several countries that the attention to the problem of violence, that of course has been increased during the pandemic, has also been put in the agenda, I would say, with more strength than it was the case. Then also all the crises are opportunities for reform. And at the moment in which the countries are thinking in the reactivation packages, in the economy of the future, how to building back better, as we say in the OECD, this really is a moment to take this opportunity to advance very, very, very strongly the gender equality. So the economy post-pandemic needs to be genderized very strongly. I was saying that the women participation in the economy is very low. I was saying that the tendency to increase is very low. Maybe the pandemic will be the opportunity really to increase and to reverse the tendency and accelerate this participation. You were also mentioning, of course, what to do. Then there is a number of things that countries can incorporate to the policy agendas. I mentioned legal frameworks. So we really believe that working on legal reforms, not only on new laws, but also on the enforcement of laws and access to justice is essential. We have recently published an OECD study about legal frameworks in Morocco, Tunisia, Jordan, and Egypt. And we have collected a large number of case studies about recent legal reforms and policy actions addressed to ensure the enforcement of legal reforms. And there is a lot of action. There is good practices. There are good examples of how to move forward. What we tried in our publication was really providing this very practical information to policymakers, to civil society actors, to private sector, in order to accelerate the reform agenda. Then, of course, when we talk about women empowerment, we always refer to two different dimensions. One is access to employment and access to private employment. So there are things that can be done there in terms of incentives to enterprises, incorporating gender considerations in social dialogue, for example, between business associations and unions. There are good examples of this. But this needs to make part, I would say, of an overall strategy to reinforce the private sector. I mean, women will find more opportunities in the private sector if the private sector itself is enhanced as a whole. So this is an important consideration. But secondly, there is also the entrepreneurship that, again, we think it has a very important potential. And here there are important things to do, removing barriers and access to information, access to financial services, incorporating gender angles to the investment promotion policies. So again, there is a number of policy actions that are being implemented. So I don't want to give a very negative message, because I would say that this is a very important priority in the policy agenda. Finally, you were, Johan, asking about digitalization. And of course, the digital transition, again, is a very important objective for the region, a challenge, but it's also plenty of opportunities. And of course, the pandemic has very clearly underlined that. So let me say that on this aspect of digital, there is a paradox in the region. I was saying that the access of women to education has improved very much, but this is not translated into more participation in the labor force. But there is a second paradox, because you know that a very important issue about digitalization is about the technological, the scientific profession. And you know that overall, I mean, the OECD countries, there is this gap in which that usually women are less inclined or less encouraged to be involved in scientific and technological profession. Well, this is not the case in many countries overall, and even in some countries, they are much better than the OECD in the average of women that really are involved in engineering studies, scientific studies. But then again, this is not translated into the market. So I would say that the involvement of women into the market is also a condition for the right transition to the digital economy of the region. Again, there is another element that is not so promising, in the sense that the digital divide is also very big, and there are large categories of women in remote areas, in rural areas, in vulnerable sectors of the segments of the society where the digital divide is particularly acute for women. So I will stop here, and of course, I'm very glad to continue the conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Condi. It was a very, very rich presentation. I mean, you touched all the aspects, even the one of the most important we are considering, which is the pillar, talking about the social dialogue. And indeed, you give concrete situation on the region. Not everything is positive, but we have some positive, probably, impacts in the future, hopefully. I will now leave the floor to Mrs. Elena Felipe Lethonen, President of the UfM, the Federation of Businesswomen Organization, and also Vice President of SME United, the Confederation of SMEs in Europe, Vice President of CEPIMI, the Spanish Confederation of SMEs, and President of FEMIPE, the Federation of SMEs in Catalonia. And I also know that she is representing the European Social Economic and Council. Mrs. De Filippi, what impact has the shift to virtual working had in the MENA region labor market? And what do you think about the role the private sector play in building more inclusive societies and pushing the region agenda toward gender equality? Mrs. De Filippi.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this presentation, and thank you for the opportunity to the UfM and Ambassador Marisa. Give me the opportunity to be here today. I would like to introduce a point that I think is very important for us as a Mediterranean community. That's the European Commission and the High Representative of the Union of Foreign Affairs and Security Policy have adopted a joint communication proposing a renewal partnership with the Southern Neighborhood. I think this is the point and the agenda for the following years, and I think it's a good point to start to renew the relations and to put an impact in the new southern-northern relations. I think 5 policies are the main point in this agreement and this new renewal partnership, and one is very important because it's focused on women. We have the green transition, migration and mobility, peace and security, resilience, prosperity, and digital transition. This is a point that we are talking all in this session about digitalization. But the most important is human development, good governance, and rule of law, where women and youth are inclusive. What it means? But it means that we are in the policies encouraging to take in account or to put in the top youth and women in an active role supporting economy and empowerment. This I'm going to the next, the first question that Mr. Butiva asked me. I would like to say several points that are not the main or are not positive actions in the working or teleworking, as we said, and others that I think are very good for this kind of job. While teleworking is well known from our work, its uptake that was boosting substantially by COVID pandemic, resulting in more than 1/3 of employed people working from home, with a greater share of women than men. As women usually take care most of caring and household working, it's particularly vital for them to achieve a proper work-life balance. Three risks for teleworking. Missing out on formal and informal support structures. As you know, women are more isolated because all their networks are more weak. Personal contacts with colleagues and access to information, promotion, and training opportunities are going down, and possible worsening of gender inequalities and increasing risk of violence and harassment, as Mr. Conde introduced as well. But we have positive issues for teleworking. Teleworking provides many opportunities to contribute to gender equality, as improved participation in the labor market is one of the points that Mr. Conde said, that we have a very low level of participation, and teleworking contributes to increase. Increased flexibility in the organization of working time and combining unpaid care responsibilities with paid employment, which can improve labor market participation, productivity gains through higher performance, and a better spatial match between demand and supply of labor without the need for moving to another place, time and cost savings due to the elimination of the moving to the workplace. I think we can add a lot, but I think these are the most concrete for women who are in the implication in teleworking. And as you asked me about the private role that what we can do in the private sector, especially in this agreement, renew partnership agreement, Southern Neighborhood with the European Union, there is a point that support the private sector, especially SMEs, which also have a fundamental role to play. It's the first time that we consider that if we are not combining public and private sector, we are not going further along. For this, we should work together to support entrepreneurship and the ecosystem, including social and cooperative entrepreneurship and startups from idea generation and maturity. Potential of diaspora should be used more actively in order to transfer competence, know-how, and technologies, and contribute to creation of business links between the European and Southern partners. Thank you, and I stop here.
Thank you, Mrs. Elena. And thank you for I mean, we are going out of time, so we'll have to quick a little bit our presentation, but hopefully we have time for a question from the audience. I will introduce Mrs. Saiden, who is president of Tunisian Startups, the association giving a voice to Tunisian startups, and the co-founder of Digital Transformation Platform. She is also acting as a Tunisian steering committee member for Digital Arabia Network, a platform supporting the digital transformation in the Arab world. Mrs. Saiden, how can we mobilize the potential of youth and more specifically young women in the regional labor market, especially taking into consideration their digital skills, so they can now become the pandemic lockdown generation?
Brilliant. Thank you. Paradox that was raised by Carlos earlier. So the MENA region is so special in terms of being a very weird equation, an equation where we have the highest rate of female engineers in the world, where we have, in a country like Tunisia, almost 60% of STEM graduates, university STEM graduates are women, and they are typically overperforming men in their university results. And then you have the startups that are co-founded by women in Tunisia, for instance, are at least 25%, and it's the same also all over the place in the MENA region. And then the burden of the COVID crisis is like the women's share of unpaid work is 80 to 90%, and it's not new. It's not specific to the COVID crisis. It has always been the case. So it's a combination of very challenging parameters. These women do disappear in the workplace. 5% only of women in C-level positions in tech companies are, so 5% of C-level managers are women, which is actually very frustrating and annoying, because the potential is there, but it's not fulfilled. However, exactly like Maria Elena, I see actually a lot of potential in terms of the new redistribution of power actually given through COVID. So let's see COVID as an opportunity actually, because remote work is allowing us to redesign the workplace that has been designed by men for men. Let's say it like that. So the situation today is like we have the possibility to design a new workplace where networks are more accessible, because women were left out in possibilities of networking events, in accessing the clubs of opportunities. Today, everyone has the same access to network, because the classical networking does not exist anymore. So we should find ways to encourage women to take the opportunity of being more present on digital networks, on the LinkedIns, on the Slack networks, on whatever networks that can allow them to reach out easily to people. and just share experiences about how easy it has become to reach out to people, because everyone is sharing the same challenge everywhere in the world. And then probably also the share the importance of the opportunity today of changing organizations. So organizations in the digital age are abide by new rules that are more flat, more horizontal, more agile, and this requires a new type of leadership that is more female, I would say, because it's a type of leadership that is less assertive, less vertical. It's more horizontal. It's more on a communication scale level. So it is actually an opportunity for women to step in and take leadership roles. And then we have also the challenge linked to mobility that was raised earlier. So everyone is supposed to stay at home. So let's use this this as an opportunity to actively tell women to leverage this opportunity to access new networks and new opportunities while staying at home. And then we should also probably leverage the community's effect and the momentum that could generated by movements. Giving a voice to women is just one click away. So you can just upload a video on YouTube, on Facebook. Facebook is very big in regions like MENA, Tunisia. The number of users of Facebook are 100% of users of internet. So everyone is just there. So having a voice is much easier than ever before. So maybe there's also another dimension to the current crisis. The limited mobility has also limited the brain drain somehow. There was a huge mobility of tech, of engineers, of tech resources towards Europe. So maybe we should really work on new frameworks that allow women to work on digital platforms and offer their tech capabilities to other markets. And there we are part of an initiative that is led by the German corporation in Tunisia, connecting the German market, opening the German market for Tunisian IT capabilities to deliver services there. So maybe we should find ways to scale up this type of initiatives. Quickly on the entrepreneurship side, we still have a challenge in terms of access to funding for women startups, women-led startups and entrepreneurs. So we are lacking accurate data there. However, the rate or the 2% only of VC funding goes to women, and it should be around the same rate in the MENA region as well. So probably we should. We have mentioned earlier the private sector. We should probably support the private sector with ideas, with tactics, how to go about this challenge, because very often they're willing to do something, but they lack ideas and what kind of policies they should implement. So, for instance, suggesting that any startups that I would invest in as a VC should have at least 50% women in their boards, not in their founding teams, but in their boards at least. And then we start there. We could also suggest some fund matching for any dollar that is invested in a female-founded startup could be fund matched. And then I close with maybe just a statement. We shouldn't get trapped in this COVID excuse, because it's very easy to say, yeah, it's COVID is the challenge. The situation is so the gender equality challenge is due to COVID. However, so the setback of women employment and opportunities for women was coming anyways through the digitalization. And so we should really face it and probably even accelerate action.
Thank you very much, Amal. I think we're running out of time, so I'll just have three quick questions for the three of you, and then you can answer the question on the chat box for the audience. So as your last speaker, Mrs. Sarden, so what do you think the emerging digital infrastructure can help bridge the gender driving by giving women the possibility to earn additional income, increase their employment opportunity and access knowledge and information? How can we bridge the digital gap so that women are not excluded from the positive spillover effect of increasing digitalization and financial inclusion?
Okay, brilliant. So for the sake of time, I'll just bring up one example. So I know we are in the Mediterranean space, but of course it helps to have a look what's happening elsewhere in the world. So like, for example, the remarkable reaction or to COVID on the Chinese level. So there is a big initiative of contactless loans that was initiated in collaboration between the private sector and the public sector, where first interest rates on small credits were reduced, and then special programs were launched to facilitate access to credit to small and micro e-commerces. Plus, an initiative was started in order to support more than 10 million micro MSMEs in their digital transformation. And this is actually key for companies specifically led and owned by women, giving them access to credit. This can be supported by digital platforms, SMB lending platforms, because according to this, to an assessment done by the Chinese, is like 1% increase in digital lending helps reduce 2.75% of the negative impact of COVID on real economy. So there is something really to do there. We have personal, so I've through my business tried to, for instance, in Tunisia, to start an SMB lending platform, a peer-to-peer lending platform. But we were actually challenged. We have been exploring over months to find workarounds to the legal barriers that we find there. Crowdfunding is not possible. Giving any kind of something that is close to credit is actually legally forbidden for anybody who is leveraging, who is not a bank. So the legal barriers are really a challenge there. One aspect linked to infrastructure and digital infrastructure there is actually the identification as well. So 45% of women over the age of 15 lack identification in low-income countries, which is a real problem because this is tightly linked to any other initiative of providing loans. If we want to build an SMB lending platform, we need the digital ID. So there are many initiatives going on in terms of the digital ID, leveraging blockchain and whatever technologies are out there. But this is the type of infrastructure we're speaking. We need to actively incentivize and push for economies to sustain, to really react positively to COVID, and specifically with the women factor.
Thank you very much, Amel. My second question will go to Mrs. De Filippi. What steps can we take towards building a friendlier business environment for young women entrepreneurs within UfM? And a question from the audience: do you think it's the right time to talk on gender response public budget?
Yes, we have the honor as UfM to be one of funding with one of the first project of the Union for Mediterranean, Young Women as Job Creators. And as you know, what we did is to support with training skills in different areas, marketing, fundraising, different, that they can go ahead with the business. I think some initiatives will follow with another organizations from NIDO, from the European Bank of Reconstruction, that provide knowledge, training, and push through the businesswoman organization in our case. These are one initiative that we are in the third phase, and we are continuously all around the Mediterranean area, specialized in Middle East and North Africa countries. And I think this now we have to go on a step further, that is on digitalization. Now we need to go to this point. We have to focus in digital opportunities. And I think the COVID has given us this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Maria Elena, for being quick and responding. So my last question goes to Mr. Conde. Gaps in gender data and the lack of trend data make it difficult to monitor the impact of the pandemic and pandemic recovery measures for the women and girls. What is OECD doing to bridge this gap? Your mic is off.
Apologies.
Okay.
Yes, a very important question, because of course, if we are talking about improving the policies and delivering better policies, the data is fundamental. We are always talking the OECD about evidence-based policies, and we need better mechanisms to measure. Again, there is good momentum in the sense that as countries are engaged in the Sustainable Development Goals agenda, most of the indicators of the SDGs require a disaggregation by sex. So there are important efforts that are taking place in that direction, but more needs to be done. A few considerations. When we are talking about data, we are not talking about only producing the data, but also about the utilization of data. So we need to work on the two dimensions, getting best information, but also making of the data, the information, a tool for policies that is used in an efficient manner. In the OECD, we have paid a very, very important attention to everything related to gender disaggregated data. And we have an horizontal gender initiative within the OECD already running for a few years, but not so much. It's maybe 7 or 8 years, and it was a full assessment made about our capacities to assess the gender dimension of our different systems of indicators, and we saw a few years ago that it was very insufficient. So since then, there is a big effort to improve the capacities. We have an accessible tool, which is the OECD Gender Data Portal, that displays very important information about education, employment, entrepreneurship, health, development, and governance. And we are working within our MENA initiative to incorporate progressively MENA countries into this portal. So we are currently working with Morocco. We will start very soon working with Egypt. We have also very good collaboration with Tunisia. So we are working at bilateral level really to partner with MENA countries in improving the statistical conditions. Just one little reference to one question that it was not to me, but I think is interesting about the gender budgeting, because the question was if it is the right moment to address that, and I can say it cannot be better moment. We were talking about the response to COVID is very much based on public investment and public subsidies, incentives. All these will be channeled through public budgets. And definitely when we were talking that the response to COVID needs to be genderized, this is a fundamental aspect, because we see that the expenditure effort of governments is increasing very much. So it's absolutely essential that gender considerations are incorporated to that. And I would say that there is good preparation in many countries of the region. Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, others have been working already in building the capacities to incorporate gender budgeting practices. So I think this is something that really needed to, I think we will have very good news on how this is done in the next few years. Thank you.
Thank you, the three of you. I would just take the occasion to talk about a platform we have just launched. It's a platform which will be in collaboration with the European Commission and the International Trade Center. It's managed by BusinessMed. It's a platform where we can do business to business. We can have partnership, a matching tool. It's a business platform help desk. We will send the link to use this platform, this digital platform online on the chat box. It's a very important instrument, as now everything is digitalized, and even some women cannot have access to this business by traveling, but you can use this tool in terms of having some important partners in several countries. from Europe, from Mediterranean, and from African countries. So I will send the link in the chat box. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Elena. Thank you, Emel. Sorry, we are reaching out of time, and thank you for this fruitful discussion. And I will give the floor back to Anna, and thank you, UfM, for all these organizations.
Thank you very much from our side. Thank you to you for the moderation and for the panel, and to the panelists for their valuable contribution. And I think we agree, all of us, that from one side, the challenge of a full leadership of women in the Mediterranean area will require further efforts. But from the other side, that the digitalization in the context of COVID-19 can be really a good opportunity if tackled in the right perspective. I will now like to introduce a small session on the UfM label project. The UfM label is a process that allows to some regional project and initiative to be promoted, to receive technical expertise, a networking opportunity, and fundraising strategy in order to become good practice at regional level. Among these one, I would like to share with you today two of them, and I will introduce Mrs. Fatima Zahra, which the CIDA director from MENA region, who will present the very interesting result of the project implemented in Morocco and Tunisia during last year, so a challenging year, and focusing on women-led business. I give the floor to Mrs. Fatima Zahra. The audio. Fatima, you are muted. You have to unmute yourself. Now, yes.
Yeah? Okay. Well, hello, everyone. Hello, Anna. Thank you very much for having me today and for giving me a chance to share with the audience how the project Seed Grow for Women was implemented in Morocco and Tunisia, and also share with you some of the results we have been able to achieve during last year. Anna, is it possible to share my presentation and give
you can share it? You can share. You use the share screen option, or if you want, we can do this.
I think it will be much easier if you can share it.
Of course, I'm going to do it right now. I will do it myself. Sorry.
And I apologize in advance. The whole morning, my connection have been a little bit slow. So if it cuts from time to time, I apologize in advance.
No problem at all. Just let me find it. Sorry.
Oh, thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, so the project I'm going to share with you today is called We Inspire, and we have implemented it throughout last calendar year. If we can move to the coming slide, please. Yeah, so we launched it in February, and actually it was the We Inspire program was launched in partnership with the Union for the Mediterranean, with a partnership and financing from the Norwegian Embassy. And its objective was to build the capacity of Moroccan and Tunisian women entrepreneurs and top-level managers within SMEs and MSMEs to allow them to grow their companies and create jobs. So if we can move to the following slide, please. Anna, can we move to the following slide? Yes, so we had initially an objective of helping women create jobs and contribute positively to the development of their countries through growing their companies. And then obviously, since we launched the program on February/March, it we were hit heavily, exactly like all the other organizations throughout the world, by the pandemic crisis and the restrictions. So we had to combine our program with other objectives that were not planned initially, and include some objectives in relationship with the SMEs resilience, and with some help to provide the entrepreneurs and the managers with tools that would allow them to better navigate the crisis. Can we move to the following slide, please? Yeah, so very quickly, and then we are going to move to the following one. So basically, we kicked off on February, and then we started the implementation on March. It took us a few months to select the beneficiaries, and then we implemented a training, mentoring, and coaching activities together with some networking activities to allow entrepreneurs, beneficiary entrepreneurs, to meet with their like-minded entrepreneurs or with potential partners or clients. Next slide, please. Yeah, so basically the mentoring program took place at the same time of the training and of the networking, and it's a little bit tricky not to be able to move from one slide to the other. So it's basically the same content as for the previous slide. So if we can move to the following one, so we can talk more about how we implemented the contingency plan for the COVID. So as I explained earlier, the program was not designed initially to be able to navigate the crisis, but we had to redesign the program in order to adapt to the new reality that was caused by the pandemic. So in-person activities were transformed into virtual activities. The scope of the program was changed in order to include activities that would allow women entrepreneurs to develop their resilience, to maintain jobs, to take advantage of all the measures that were offered locally by local government in order to help the entrepreneurs navigate the crisis. And we even changed the content of the training program in order to allow more focus on managing the crisis, more focus on the digitization of some of the activities and of some of the tools of the SMEs that were run by our women entrepreneurs, and obviously the digital transformation to help them put very quickly on the market some digital offerings that would allow them to sell their products, even though they did not have physical access to their clients anymore. Can we please move to the comment slide? Yeah, so as a result, we were very, very surprised by the quality of the beneficiaries that we have been able to onboard on the program. 127 women and Tunisian beneficiaries were able to join the program. Just to put things into perspective, our target was 100, but again, because we designed the program to become virtual 100%, we were able to accept the applications of more women than the target because we had no more a limitation of the training rooms capacity, etc. So in terms of activities, we have been able to offer 16 training workshops to our beneficiaries, to facilitate 530 mentoring hours between the beneficiaries and the mentors, and to organize 4 networking events. All of them were run virtually. As a result, our beneficiaries, during the pandemic crisis, they were able to create 150 jobs, which was a very pleasant surprise, even for us who were with them during the whole year. And more than our beneficiaries rated us or the program with more than 85% satisfaction rate. The 2 numbers that are really also very interesting to share with you is that 99% of Moroccan beneficiaries were able to reach their forecast revenue of 2020, knowing that we collected the revenue forecasts at the very beginning of the crisis. The women beneficiaries were not yet aware that the pandemic was going to last so long. Everybody was expecting restrictions that would last between 2 or 3 months, but we ended up with a whole year of restrictions. And even though there were those restrictions, and even though women beneficiaries were had to face all the pandemic related challenges, 99% of them in Morocco were able to reach their revenue forecast of 2020. An even more pleasant surprise was the level of revenue increase within the Tunisian beneficiaries enterprises. 16.5% of them were able to increase their revenues of 2020 compared to 2019, even though despite all the challenges related to the pandemic. Now, if there is one keyword I want to share with you today that helped us help our entrepreneurs to be more resilient during last year and even increase their revenues, maintain jobs, and create new jobs, it is the digital transformation. It is their agility and their capacity to very quickly offer to the market a digital value proposition and digitize their way of working that could allow them to reach out to their customers in a digital way, and that helped them overcome the restrictions related to the pandemic, and thus maintain their revenues at the same level or even increase it, and thus create new jobs. And by the way, most of the jobs that were created were related to digital marketing or to develop business development in the digital area, which is something that we are very proud of. And now, during this year, we are trying to build on this experience and on this success. And we have built a program around the digitization and the digital transformation of the SMEs. And we strongly think that this is the future in our region. Now, just for the last slide, one insight that I would like to share with you is that during crisis time, large companies, they do have the capacity or they do have the choice of saying, we either navigate the crisis or we take risk, or we just wait until the crisis is over. When it comes to small enterprises, when it comes to startups, the major risk or the biggest risk they can take is not doing anything, because not doing anything means that they are going to die within months. So during crisis time, SMEs, startups, small entrepreneurs, self-employed people are the ones who take the most risks. And our job, our mission is to help them minimize this risk and show them the different options that they have in order to help them better navigate the crisis. And I would like to take this opportunity before I close my intervention to thank Anna and all her colleagues that we have been able to work with during last year from the Union for the Mediterranean, for their flexibility and for giving us as much flexibility and space that we needed to adapt the program so that our program can adapt to the new reality that was caused by the pandemic last year. So thanks to you, and thanks to all the entrepreneurs who believed in us and who spent all their time with us last year and allowed us to help them navigate the crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fatima, for this, let's say, insight from the field, that it's also encouraging in terms of seeing that indeed, despite the crisis, economic business led by women can produce and can create new jobs. Well done from our side, and hopefully we can still work together also this year, because there is the possibility to expand also for this year the activities. I will now give the floor for the second project that will be presented by Dr. Nila Amara, that she is the program management specialist at the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, to present the pilot project that will be launched this year in Tunisia. Nila, I give the floor to you, and you will speak in French.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. I don't know, maybe if I should let some time to our attendees to turn on interpretation mode for this communication that will be in French. Je voudrais d'abord.
So first of all, I would like to thank the Union for the Mediterranean for this invite and for giving us this opportunity to present this pilot program that we have started in Tunisia in January. I'm going to share now my screen for this short presentation. And I will also take some liberty and I'll be able to be quicker also. So this pilot program is part of a program which is larger, which is labelized by the UfM since 2015. The objective is to promote the women empowerment in the MENA region. So Algeria, Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Morocco, Palestine, and Tunisia, these are the countries. Currently, we are in the second stage of this program, and it is more ambitious as compared to the first stage. And the specificity of the second part is that it has a regional dimension to it, or a regional component to it. And we are working on it right now. And there are also some national components which are articulated through country action plans, which were defined with an entry point, which was the selection of some criteria and elements in every country. And so we concentrate our efforts on the main problems that we have identified in each country in terms of the female entrepreneurial development, so access to market, funding, and also the improvement of quantity and quality of production in the different value chains. These plans are currently being reviewed in order to integrate the COVID response with regards to recovering and improving the situation of companies. And we want to strengthen the digital capacities of women in order for them to benefit from the positive points. And also want to strengthen the capacities, women's capacities in terms of circular economy, because we have seen that the value chain disruptions after the COVID pandemic forces us to refocus this value change. This is the general framework. So thanks to the contribution of the Monaco Principality, we have this pilot program in Tunisia with natural cosmetic products. This is a value chain which was selected after the mapping that we did, the gender sensitive mapping that we conducted. Why this value chain? Well, this is a value chain in which there is a strong female entrepreneurship concentration. And this was also confirmed by our gender sensitive analysis based on different criteria, but now I cannot go into details, and this will be also quite technical. And this was validated by our national counterparts. This program started at the beginning of January. Where are we now? Well, we are now mapping all the female companies in this sector. There are a lot of them, and we can find them almost in all the regions in Tunisia. And we have these natural resources which are available quite largely. And so we have access, or we have focused our action to facilitate the access to market for these companies. So in the first year, our intervention strategy aims at identifying the champions. So those companies that have a quick capacity of creating around them this training effect on the whole product value chain in the cosmetics market. So this is the strategy that we have selected. And in doing so, this year we will strengthen capacities in terms of digitization, digital marketing, but also certificates and also compliance with the norms and standards for these companies. So this will be done in synergy with the activities that we conduct regionally in the frame of this program, and more precisely, the establishment of relationships with international buyers. That's how we work at the UNIDO, and so we work on markets and then we go back to producers, and then we will launch a communication campaign about women in industry so that we can raise more awareness amongst women, to tell them that industry is not a male's world and that they can also work in this sector. I would like to finish mentioning the challenges and the opportunities that we see in the framework of this program. Well, the challenges and the opportunities, of course, are mainly related to the COVID nowadays, which also changed our way of seeing things, but which also gives us many opportunities. But in the short term, it's clear that we have this resistance in terms of investment because we are lacking some visibility, and we also have some difficulties in terms of international movements. But thanks to digital tools, we have the possibility of giving our technical assistance remotely. And this is really very lucky. Then about our sector more specifically, we see that we have a lot of small companies with a very different level of skills and maturity. So we will need them to be more structured. Maybe we will need to move forward towards the clustering, or maybe creating consortiums for the export, creating productive alliances for those companies to better approach the market. And then, of course, we will need in our country action plans and in our interventions, we will need to favor innovation and to enable innovation in this sector by strengthening the access to technology and also access to funding. And also we will need to strengthen the ecosystem. In terms of the opportunities, specifically for this value chain, well, this is a value chain that, or in which products, natural cosmetic products are really increasing, and the COVID has strengthened this trend with a change in the consumption habits. People now like to buy more natural products, and also with body products which are more natural. Then in Tunisia, we are quite lucky because we have a bio label which is recognized by the EU. And then we also have high-skilled women in all our territory. As I said before, a good quality and variety of natural resources. So the companies of these sectors are really well distributed over our national territory. So that's what we will do. That's what we will focus on in the next months to come in terms of challenges and opportunities. Also, I will finish with this. I'm here if you have any questions. You have also my email on the screen. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm here absolutely open to answer to your questions about this program or other programs in our MENA region. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Nelia, aussi pour votre présentation. I switch to English, sorry. Thanks a lot for your valuable contribution. I would like just to mention that Both your presentation will be shared on the website with a full report of this event, so that people can also have the possibility to have a look on your specific contribution. And as you mentioned in both your presentation, digitalization is an opportunity. I would like only to mention that in July 2021, the next UfM Women Business Forum will be focused on digitalization and more concretely how the digital economy can help women entrepreneurs to navigate the post-COVID pandemic. I will now introduce the second panel, Focus on Women in Agriculture, and I would like to give the floor to Mrs. Yasmin Seguirat, Policy and Communication Manager and Gender Policy and Women Empowerment Focal Point at the Center for Advanced Mediterranean Agronomic Service. Yasmin, the floor is yours.
Oui, bonjour, bonjour à tous, merci.
Good morning to everyone. Thank you very much, Anna. We have a delay, so I'm going to directly to explain that I work in CHIAM, which is an intergovernmental society in the Mediterranean area, and I am very hopeful to animate this panel of women in agricultural and the rural vision. I'm going to give the floor to our panelists in order to explain which are our challenges and how to recover from the COVID, and to remember the importance in the Mediterranean region that women have and have contributed to the rural economy and to the agriculture. They ensure our security, our food security, even though the inequalities. As all the crises, even the pandemic, these women have the importance because they have been in the center of the resilience of communities and families, and is the reason why they have to take into account of the women is what this session we are going to enhance. We want to put the accent on the way of the decision-making of women in the rural areas that can lead to the rural infrastructure more resilient and having the food system more sustainable in order to avoid crises of all type. Without delay, I'm going to give the floor to our panelists, and I'm going to introduce in 2 words Nadia Melchika, that is working in the FIDA, which is the National Fund on the Rural Development, and technical specialist on gender and social inclusion. It is a division that have importance in Nadia has been directories on the Western Africa and has directed and coordinated programs in Benin, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, and she has worked in many public and private sectors. Afterwards, we are going to listen Miriam Fuller, which is a financial engineer. She has worked in the investment banks and has created a Senji, which is in order to give solar energy in Africa, developing innovative programs for the farmers, industries, banks, and we go from the consumption to the energy production. She will explain much more, and they develop projects in Algeria. She is an international speaker, very engaged in the women development, and she has got many awards of the high level for the success of her realization. We have a pleasure to listen Margarita Rico, which is professor in the technical school in the University of Valladolid in Spain. These research works has focused in the rural development and specialized on the rural women and the contribution to the development, the rural tourism. And recently she has made research on the green farming with the sustainable forest and with very specific points. The debate is going to ask two questions of the panelists. And I'm going to ask the first question, linked to a very new question from your experiences and for your field of work. How crises as COVID have an impact on women in the agricultural or rural areas? And according to you, which priority, which measures can help to overcome the impact? Very quick, because unfortunately we can't go to deeper details, but I want to like your point of view on the specificities in the rural areas in the crisis time. So I give you the floor in order to explain the post-COVID situation. Thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and I would like to thank the UfM to opportunity to give the floor and to speak a few words of, as the Ambassador Faraja has already said in her introduction. There is a common history, but I'm going to change into English.
Thank you so much. So I guess there is a common thread between all the different speakers, given that this is the last panel. But a year into the COVID-19 pandemic, what we know is that all countries and most families have been affected. And as the crisis unfolded, governments were required to adopt a number of measures to actually control the spread of the virus. So country-wide lockdowns were introduced, business were closed, which led to a crushing of the formal and the informal economy. So as noted before, the region of the Mediterranean is extremely diverse. So the crisis itself resulted in a wide range of impacts. It stressed pre-existing political tensions, exacerbated fragile situations, and deepened inequalities. So now if we just focus on the inequalities, vulnerable groups and women have been particularly disproportionately affected. And this has been the case for a number of reasons, and I will just mention a few of them for you. First is that the burden of unpaid care and domestic work have increased. This has been mentioned before already, but in recent study conducted in the region, 70% of women surveyed reported an increase in household chores and childcare duties compared to 59% of men. And specifically for rural areas, women reported that 60% of their time were dedicated to household chore or to unpaid work, compared to 12% of the time for the male counterpart. And now if we look at the time spent within a day, that's 16% of the time of women accounts for 14% or 14 hours per day. So that doesn't leave a lot of time to actually pursue economic or activities for which they could generate an income. The second important element has been the disruption in public transport that have particularly affected rural household and community worker, including women involved in off-farm working, because most of them rely on public transportation. It's been mentioned already earlier that the informal economy has been particularly touched as well. And this is particularly important for the informal employment in agriculture, where 96% of women are engaged compared to 80% of men. And so those low-paying jobs, once they are disrupted, is particularly challenging, given that, as we heard before, these are not protected by social protection, by social services. It was also mentioned that women entrepreneurs and micro businesses have been hit very, very hard for a number of reasons. With the reduce of demand, of course, a loss of cash flow, and they're also particularly involved in some of the sectors that were hardly hit by some of the lockdown measures. We are referring to accommodation, food services, agriculture, forestry, and fisheries. For instance, a study conducted in Montenegro showed that for the first 4 months of the pandemic, the cumulative decline in net wage was $2.4 million for women. Similarly, a lot of women businesses actually reported that the cash flow itself decreased more compared to the businesses of men. And lastly, one of the big effects, of course, that we have mentioned is the shadow pandemic. Women have been at a greater risk of gender-based violence. So now to respond to the second question, when you ask what type of priority actions could be taken or could be addressed, there are a number of them. I mean, of course, equally important is to ensure that social policies are revised to prioritize the services to address the needs as well as the victims of gender-based violence. And that's already, we see that is being addressed in many of the countries. Equally important when we look at rural economies is to ensure that assets are provided, that they do have packages so that they do not miss on the calendar, on the agricultural calendar. Because of course, if that calendar is missed, that can further exacerbate the food security in the rural communities. Other packages also have to be provided so that those families can compensate, if you will, for the loss of income. And this would contribute to a revision to some of the fiscal policies so that social protection services as well as relief packages are provided to businesses as well as families. Support to rural financial services also is important because then families or businesses can renegotiate some of the payment terms, and the microfinancial institution can also receive additional liquidity so that they are not further stressed by some of the measures imposed. And then, of course, as we mentioned earlier, it is extremely important to have women represented at all different stages of the decision-making process so that they can respond to the specific needs of rural women in the different contribution to the economy. And then just as a way of mentioning this also, those are some of the policies that can be addressed. Some priority actions have also been supported by IFAD in response to this within the region, where IFAD, in collaboration with some of the governments, has actually reprioritized some of the funds within the projects to respond to some of the priorities in the countries and have helped the countries identify what were some of the key areas related to asset production, digitalization, support for financial services, as well as promoting the messaging within the communities so that COVID-19 messaging, as well as some of the services related to equipment, sanitation, was actually in the hand of the rural communities. And I will leave it at that at the moment. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Ndaya. Absolument, absolument.
Yes, the sectors are essential. Thank you very much for these contexts that you have very well summarized. But I want to put the same question to Margarita. For a point of view, you are going to speak on the education and research. What can research can tell us on the impact of the pandemic, on the crisis? And can you explain to you, Miriam? Merci.
Everyone, and thanks so much for the invitation to this interesting and necessary webinar about women in leadership. First of all, it's important to assert that not all rural areas are uniform, nor do all the women who live there face the same problems. Rural women's situation and expectations will be determined by variables such as their age, their level of studies, their family responsibilities, or their level of income. A diversity that implies a high degree of complexity when studying this collective. For this reason, it's completely necessary to consider detailed studies and research about gender inequality in different territories, because this research allows us to know the situation, problems, and needs of women in each rural space. Indicators systems are so useful to design and to test the situation's evolution. In
or in crisis times, like now, the analyses are even more important to help public institutions to the decision-making process. Education and training are essential for women to expedite their incorporation to the work market. Currently, young rural women have opted for higher education compared to their mothers. This fact represents a fundamental asset in this territory, and it's fostering a true generational break. However, the situation will reach positive results as long as that higher educational level and training capacity reverts in the small villages and serves to increase the possibilities of development of the rural territory. Rural women contribution is basic to reach the rural development. In my different studies, I've demonstrated that more young, qualified, and working rural women, more rich and developed territory. So rural women are a basic piece to diversify productive activities and energize economic and social life in rural areas. Therefore, employment opportunities for women in rural areas must be based on the productive diversification of a wide range of activities, promoting specialization and taking account the advantages and the potential of the territory, but without losing the identity of rural spaces and preserving its environmental, cultural, historical, and heritage values. It is, for example, about exploring new activities whose demand has been born recently, rural tourism, environment, services to the population, etc., or exploit the potential of other traditional activities that already exist, but that still have room for growth and success, such as the case of the agri-food industry, the production of ecological and quality agricultural products, or handcrafted activities. Finally, the COVID crisis has showed us that telecommuting is a reality nowadays, so women can work in rural areas from home, even in very qualified jobs.
Absolument, absolument. Merci beaucoup, Margarita, pour cette...
Thank you very much, Margarita, for this specific entry. Miriam, I will give you the floor. You are an entrepreneur, and I would like that your intervention could help us to see the rural agriculture. Miriam, you have the floor. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Opportunity today to talk about the rural world et le monde agricole. Merci Anna. Je pense que je vais le faire.
Agricultural world. I'm going to speak French, and I'm going to speak on the experience why women are after the crisis and can help to manage the crisis. First of all, because we have the changement on ourselves. And we'll take the very important book of Simone de Beauvoir that explains throughout biology we are different from men, but we are a vector of this changement. As women, we are adolescents, we have most important changes in our body because as we call the puberty. But afterwards, men have a stability thanks to the testosterone that allows us to have different sense of humor that we don't have women. Each month, once more, the women body is perturbated with the menstruation period. And during 9 months, our body is completely changed where we are in a pregnancy. And afterwards, when we go to menopause, our body lives turbulences and non-turbulences. the doctors and the sociologists and doctors explain which point this biological perturbation that we regularly live help us to navigate in the troubled waters and to allow to bring with us the changement and the shift. The world needs to take care of the world. It has been disrupted with this sanitary crisis, and women are invited to manage the sanitary crisis because we know how to take care of children. We have to take care of the adolescents and the old people. We have to take care of the patients, and we have to help to care the community. It's because we can be able to take care of the nation. And Michael Jackson said, we can protect our environments and our communities. And it's true that the results are there. This way, we don't say women, but Forbes magazine says that. And their journalists has shown that during the crisis, countries, societies, local level communities, if they were directed were women, they have had more success. It's because of that I invite you to read these studies, because you will have the explanations why we have nowadays, we have performed as women far better than men. In order to speak of the agricultural or the local level, women have to take care in a different manner what they produce, what they harvest, and what they are, because they have an immediate impact of the rivers pollution, the water that we irrigate the plants. And we know that women have always been active in the agricultural for the harvest, the transformation. But the problem of those rural women are ourselves. And the second point is the access to the finances. For the crisis management, we are much more indicated than men, and we have been jolted by this crisis, but I am optimistic that the new world will be taken into account by women. Thank you very much, Miriam, for this so beautiful presentation and very pertinent presentation. But I've been asked to conclude without questions because we have taken a delay. But I would like, we have said in a different manners that women can secure the food, and they know how to build more sustainable and more inclusive systems. And we have to invest in women in order to help them to deploy all the potential. I will ask you if you have something to make these objectives, how would be your force, your point, how we could invest in order to allow women in these rural areas to deploy all their potentials. Margarita, Dina, and afterwards Miriam.
Depend on the territory and the possibility to create employment, the competitiveness of agricultural systems, and the proximity to cities or rural towns of attraction. The offer of visible female employment, well paid and compatible with their family life, and the possibility of extra local labor markets can allow, together with the highest level of studies and professional qualification, the permanence and the return of young rural women to the rural spaces. In this sense, a more determined attitude is demanded on the part of political managers towards the rural areas most affected by the population and social, economic, and institutional abandonment. Current public policies should tend, in the first place, to undertake important measures of territorial reorganization based on an efficient geographic redistribution. The empowerment.
Merci, Margaret.
Yeah.
C'était un levier, un levier prioritaire.
It was only one leverage, none more. We will have all the information we will share on the presentation. We are very sorry because we have taken delay. And leverage, you have Dinah and Miriam. Wait, I'm going very strict.
Quite challenging because we had so much to say. But what I would say is to adopt gender transformative approaches for food systems. And by that, I mean the approaches that goes to challenging the social norms. Because as we have said and then we've discussed, it's not good enough just to have qualified women capable to do the job, right? I mean, they still cannot do the job, but they are still thinking some things that are not working right. And I believe that it goes to a change of mentality in some context and addressing the social norms. So having that, having some clear action plans, clear will to measure the data, the sex disaggregated data to actually track the progress could be game changer. Over to you.
Merci beaucoup, Ndaya.
Thank you very much, Miriam. 1 minute. I want to say that we have now to understand the needs of the women farmers in order to bring solutions on the solar energy. And I have met someone in the desert and in the north of the country, Lydia Narouge, that's created for Sul 7 hectares of the bio in order to have 2 different farmers. The access to financing, and there are some tips that I want to give you. All the financial system is done for men and to the men. The agricultural bank here in Algeria is they don't speak to the rural women, so it's only made for men. This is a leverage. We have to have the access to the finance. People want to maintain the tradition, but the law would allow women to have access to the financing. Thank you very much to everyone. And there is 1:10, so I thank you for the timing, and I give the floor to the next panel for the women in the health that is going to be moderated by Anna Rita Ronzoni. I wish you a good end of the day. Thank you.
Merci Yasmine, merci to the
Thank you, Yasmin. Thank you to all the participants. I'm really so sorry for these disruptions, and I promise you that in the framework of the next Women for Mediterranean, we will give you special place, and we will be able to develop these issues.
Rita Ronzoni for the third floor. Sorry, for the third panel. The floor is yours.
Yes, sure. Merci, Yasmin, and thank you, Anna, for this opportunity to be here. And welcome everybody to this the panel 3 of Women and Health Care Sector. So my name is Anna Rita Ronzoni. I am a gender-based violence technical officer at the WHO Office for the Eastern Mediterranean region in Cairo. And it's really an honor to be here with you, moderating this panel with such distinguished guests and our audience. So just to put it in the right framework, in the past year, COVID-19 put the globe in front of one of the most difficult challenges. And the pandemic exacerbated social inequalities and highlighted the disproportionate impact that emergencies, including health emergencies, have on health protection and socio-economic stability of women and girls. And everybody has been called to do their part to address COVID-19, and definitely women since day one have been at the front line of the fight against the virus, accounting for 70% of the health workforce. So if from one side, the crisis highlighted the disproportionate burdens that women carry From the other, it made very clear the centrality of their contribution. So women leaders need to be at the decision-making table to enhance the health agenda and therefore make sure that healthcare is for all. In this session, we'll discuss how to strengthen women leadership in the health sector by addressing the gender leadership gap, which definitely constitute a serious barrier to achieving SDGs and universal health coverage. And I'm really delighted to be a moderator of this panel with such distinguished guests. We have Professor Agnès Buzyn, the WHO Director General's Envoy for Multilateral Affairs. Professor Buzyn leads the WHO engagement with a number of multilateral organizations, including UfM, and she served as a French Minister of Solidarity and Health from 2017 to 2020. Welcome, Professor Buzyn. And then we have Dr. Rupa Dutt, the co-founder and executive director of Women in Global Health, an organization working to achieve gender equality within global health leadership. And she's also practicing internal medicine physician at Georgetown University hospital in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Rupa. And Dr. Miriam Fuller, WHO country representative in Morocco. She's a pharmacist with a specialization in public health, health financing, and health planning. So welcome everybody to this panel, and I will do a first round of questions. Time is short, so please, if you can be short in your answer, it will be great. Professor Buzyn, the first question is for your kind attention. In the introduction, we mentioned the gender leadership gap during COVID-19 pandemic. So how we can address this gap, including in the recovery phase? And it will be great if you could address this question from WHO perspective. Thank you so much.
Merci.
Thank you so much. Thanks to the UfM for having me. I'm really happy to be part of this panel. Yes, I joined the WHO in a period of time where the COVID pandemic has highlighted the major inequalities between men and women in the health sector. I believe that everybody knows these figures, but they show perfectly the situation. 70% of women are women working in health systems. They are active today, and only 25% in the senior positions. So in the decision-making positions, only 25% are women. So there is a very big difference between the senior sector and the standard sector, if I could put it this way, in the care service system in general. Then when it comes to task forces that have been created to fight this pandemic, most of the advisory boards and most of the task forces on COVID-19 are made up by men. Women have been left aside from these working groups. So how can we solve this situation? Of course, we need public policies which go directly to the root of these inequalities. These inequalities might be political in nature or cultural or economic, and sometimes they have a religious component. So it is mandatory that in the recovery after the COVID pandemic, we need to have the gender equality policies at the center of our agenda. Either in the preparation of the response after the crisis, either in the reconstruction of more resilient health systems. Of course, I'm referring to the primary care systems, and I'm also referring to the universal health coverage, which is so much wanted by the WHO. And of course, human resources, we need a human resources policy which includes women, but at all the decision-making levels and not just in the most exposed jobs, because women were really very exposed during the COVID pandemic as nurses or as care agents in elderly homes, for example. And we also need to change the narrative about women. Women are not just care consumers. They are not just service providers. They are also a vector for change. This has been said in the previous panel. They do have this capacity to reflect about change and to be this drive for change. So all countries are fighting against the pandemic, and we also work on the equitable distribution of vaccines, tools, etc. We work for the reinforcement of health systems, and we need to make sure that gender equality is really part of the priorities of our organization at all levels of this recovery and reconstruction. We have a very good momentum for doing that. This is 2021, because on the one hand, this is the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Plus 25 Declaration. As you know, this was a declaration where we stated this will of reaching the gender equality, and 25 years later, we will, well, state and assess the situation. And so all the governments, all the agents, all the NGOs, all the civil societies are working on that event, on that anniversary of the Beijing Declaration. And of course, I would like to thank Mrs. Rupadat, sorry for the pronunciation, women in global health, for all the policies that you have implemented for women in the health system. I'm so glad to share this panel with you, I have to say. So this initiative is also part, as you know, and I would like to thank Mrs. Bupadat for being present of the forum that will take place this year, chaired by France and Mexico. This is a forum on gender equality also. So finally, why is this a good moment, a specifically good moment? Well, because 2021 has been declared by the WHO during the General Assembly on Health. It has been designed as the International Year for care workers and health workers. So this is the right moment of highlighting the role of women in this sector, and it's the time for us to improve their visibility. And just to finish, I would like to say that we have a triple benefit, because women are working, they are engaged in the health system, so they benefit from that also. And this allows us also to make these health jobs more attractive for women, and this allows them to be more visible also. And so this favors the increase of numbers of workers in the health system. We know that we are missing about 18 million workers in the health system if we want to meet the needs of the population. So this will allow them to increase their leadership, and this will give them more economic freedom and autonomy. That's very important for women. So this is the right year. The governments need to take political actions and measures in order to favor the place of women. And I think that we will go back to that. We need to remove all the barriers. Maybe we will later speak about the specific measures for doing that. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Professor Bizan, for this very
answer. And I really want to highlight what you've said about the role of women in healthcare sector. They are not only consumer, they are not only health worker, but definitely we are, as women, agent of change. And so this is a very, very important aspect. And I would like to turn the question to Dr. Rupa about having a gender perspective at all the level of the health system, not only at leadership level, which is key, but also at the level of the healthcare workers. So my question to you, Dr. Rupa, is how we can work with healthcare workers to instill values of positive leadership. And when we say positive leadership, we mean recognizing women's experience and vision in how to deal with the healthcare, and what can be done to fight against cultural stereotypes and bias around women's leadership in the health sector. Over to you.
Great, thank you, Anna. And I just want to say it's really great to be here with WHO colleagues, especially Dr. Agnes Buzan, just so much partnership, deep partnership in this panel on these issues. So many of the things that I was going to talk about, the problems, the leadership gap, a lot of those already have been said, so that lets me really focus on the solution aspect of it. So, you know, when you opened this panel, really, you know, when we think about women's leadership in health, we have to really recognize the root problem is that women are not valued in the health sector. And so this point about changing the narrative means one, valuing the women in the health sector, seeing the expertise that they have, but also looking at the field of health and looking at how women are overall viewed in society as often vulnerable populations and not necessarily the agents or the vector of change as was used earlier, but they truly are the leaders in their homes, in their communities, and in the health sector, we really need to see them as also the experts. This pandemic has shown us over and over again, when you do have women contributing to decision making at the most top levels, countries are you know, responding to the COVID-19 response with a more holistic way, with more social protections and having a different leadership style, more collaborative leadership style. And that also plays out really at the community level. If women that make up majority of the health sector were at the decision-making table at COVID-19, we know for a fact that at least two things that they would definitely do is they'd make sure that maternal and reproductive health services would not have been disrupted. We know that in Ebola outbreaks, COVID-19, in Ebola outbreaks, as we expect in COVID-19, will result in unsafe delivery services. We also know that if women were at decision-making and task forces, they would have health systems designed for women so that PPE currently being modeled on men's bodies would actually be made for female bodies, and changing in working conditions. And all of these things are really addressing the root inequities that make it very challenging for women in the health and care workforce to have decent jobs and to really feel supported. So what we would really say is, yes, there is the triple gender dividend, and Dr. Bunzan has already explained the triple gender dividend and covered the fact that if we do approach women in the health sector from this way, it is really an investment. So it's not a cost to governments, but this investment has a greater return. It leads to more jobs being created in the health sector. Every job that's created in the health sector leads to 2 to 3 other jobs created in health-related sectors, including education, transportation. So we know this leads to broader economic growth. Second, we also know when we invest in decent jobs for women, it leads to women's economic empowerment, increases their income, decision-making power, and also with a multiplier effect on welfare for children and families. So that's really the gender aspect of it. And finally, if we fill health jobs, we'll achieve our universal health coverage agenda as well. And so what can really be done? We're really excited that we'll be launching at the Commission of Status Women in about 3 weeks, a toolkit on leadership. I'm going to give you just a preview of what is included in this. It's a 4-point framework on the basic roadmap for governments, civil society, CEOs, private sector, and women. And it puts the legal framework in place. We know, for example, there are already international instruments such as the Convention on Equal Pay by ILO. We also know the ILO, International Labor Organization, Convention 190 on ending all forms of harassment and violence is currently in the process of being ratified. So we want governments to ratify that so that every workplace for all genders is free from all forms of sexual harassment and violence. But we also know that there is a framework, but can't be a blueprint. Every country has to start at different levels and really use the ecological model, there's barriers and actions to be taken at the individual level to transform gender norms, at the interpersonal level, and then also at the institutional and societal level. And it's been really great today to hear from many country examples of how change is happening. And that's exactly what this framework is meant to do, is to give a model, but that it's not a blueprint. It needs to be contextualized at the country level. Number three, everyone has a part to play. There is a checklist and policy action paper for men. And I know this theme has come up today, but it really applies in the health sector as well. Men's health suffer just as much as women's when patriarchal norms serve an elite minority of men. So we know that suicide, homicide rates, harmful masculinities are also impacting men, not just during COVID-19, but in general, and we must approach it that way. And then four, we call on policymakers to be gender transformative leaders because it is the smart thing to do for everybody's health. And when we say gender transformative, it's not just recognizing the gender aspects, but it is actually looking at what are the root reasons for power imbalances and how do we create programs and policies to address those root imbalances and transform the relationship that exists. And finally, women need to think politically and act collectively. And this is why I'm really proud to be leading a global movement that has 24 chapters, 50,000 supporters. And what we're able to do is use collective action, which is a form, a tool for collective bargaining that ILO has promoted for achieving the agenda for labor rights for over 100 years, to really be a means to negotiate for better conditions for all health workers, but especially women. So back to you, Anna.
Thank you so much, Rupa. You are such an inspiration, and your organization as well. And I mean, I will not take the time for panelists to talk, but I like the fact that when we talk about inclusive decision making, it's not just a return in this case for women, but for the society overall. And as you mentioned, I mean, to have women at the decision table does not mean only have women at the decision table for policies, but also at implementation, and mostly and importantly at community levels as leaders in their communities. So going more deeper into the field work, I want to ask to Dr. Bigdeli about her experience as WHO country representative of Morocco. So your experience at country level is fundamental to inform future policies and actions. From a country perspective, which health system vulnerabilities has COVID-19 highlighted, and how can women lead the way to a stronger and more inclusive and equal healthcare system? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Anna, and thank you very much to my co-panelists for actually already saying all of it. So I think my intervention is going to be very short, because I think all of that has been said at global level definitely applies at country level, with maybe some highlights. So I'm not going to repeat what has been said. The health system vulnerabilities, including, shortage of human resources that particularly affect then the workload of women and the place of women in the health sector. And this, of course, this health crisis is a social and an economic crisis, and therefore we have seen, for example, clusters in Morocco among factory workers, women factory workers who were packing strawberries. That was the first very big cluster that appeared after the lockdown was lifted and people had returned to work. So there are those social vulnerabilities that actually add to the health system vulnerabilities, and that particularly also affect women in the pandemic. How can we lead the way? Aside from all the institutional approaches that Dr. Buzyn and Dr. Dat have already framed, they're all very valid, but I would like to add three things that are, I think, very much specific to this region. Refusing tokenism is one thing that's important. Women should lead the way by refusing tokenism. In our region, unfortunately, there is probably a lot of tokenism, but also in other regions, in terms of bringing the single woman on a panel or the single woman in a decision-making body, or sort of pushing gender parity by bringing always the same sort of women voices, because they are prominent women voices. There are only a few. So I think we need to make sure, as individual women in the health sector, to try and refuse that tokenism and sort of send, organizers of events or conveners of panels or conveners of decision-making bodies back to their responsibilities and say, think twice. Can you find, I'm sure we can find women who can contribute to this debate. And it's not enough to say, we're bringing 7 men and 1 woman, and we have done our homework. That's first thing. And then be a ladder for your peers. Be a ladder for if you are in a position of leadership, if you are in a position of decision making, trying to see how the way up the ladder can be facilitated for women peers. Not in terms of removing any requirement for quality or experience or expertise, but actually to make sure that the balance of power, as Rupa said, is maintained when we are making decisions in our own environment. And the third aspect is really the cultural norms. And this is really the systemic approach that we really need to adopt in addressing gender equality in the health sector, is to say that, can women work in rural areas? Can women work in conflict-affected areas? Can they work in difficult suburbs, difficult neighborhoods? Yes, they can. Of course they can. But is it allowed that they do so? Is it acceptable that they do so? Do men accept that? Does the system accept that? That's the main problem. It's not their capacities, of course, and it's not their willingness, but it's the whole environment that actually brings that to bring women who have been educated to work just as men to actually go sideways in their careers in the health system. Basically, sort of reconvert into positions that are more comfortable for men to see them in. And that is something that we really need to point and change.
Thank you so much, Dr. Miriam, not only for flagging the need of addressing the so-called vulnerability from an overall holistic perspective, but also for bringing us into the second level of this panel discussion, which is more looking into the practical recommendation and the possible solution. So I would like to ask a second question to Professor Buzan, and really taking the chance of having her in this panel to go again into practical recommendation for health leadership and asking what concrete measures can be taken to address the gender leadership gap, especially in the health sector. And if you can tell us about your experience as a former Minister of Health in France and as a leader of other major French institutions, because sometimes the real experience of women, this is really, we are leading by example. So over to you, Dr. Buzan.
Thank you very much, Anna Rita. As a matter of fact, my personal experience, I will join the recommendations of WHO because it goes throughout politics. The policy has to help to change the world, and we start by laws. It starts by a legal framework giving the place of the women. And there are 4 work axes: the legal framework, with, of course, with a lot of work that we have to do, and the ways, and with the question of the work that can discriminate women. We have to work on the equal pay, going through the transparency of the salaries, public and private. We have to have parental politics enabling the share of tasks between men and women, giving more flexibilities to women in order to have access to the work. And is a legal framework protecting the women from the violences. And we have to say this: the second country has not law of the sexual harassment. And I think the Convention of International of the ILO that is going to join in June of 2025 could advance in this sexual harassment in the place of work. Those are the policies and the laws. The second point, which is important, the second axe, is recommendations and the tools on the institutions and the working world in order to adapt the system to the women. We have to enable the women leadership without going through the quotas. The quotas is not something that it could be a tool, it could be something that we have to respect, but it's a tool that allows women to have access to the responsibility position and allow other women to have an access to these jobs. We have to have a recruitment approach on these firms, being sensitive to the gender questions and the discriminations and the question of the difference. And the health sector, we have to rebalance the senior police positions with the women, with the juniors, with our majority. The third working axe enable where we have the women employability and how to allow women to share professional and family life. It goes throughout policies, public policies, in order to help women to take care of their children. Those are the difference between the public on the countries that have these policies and countries that do not have. Because women sometimes they are obliged to maintain their children and they don't have access to the hierarchy. And the fourth axe, which is going to be discussed, to work on stereotypes and norms in order to allow each one to envisage all the possibilities without taking into account the stereotypes, to help women to engage on the scientific careers, on the technologies, to see the CVs, to see the curricula. There are many public policies, and there is a message in order to go through. It goes throughout our holistic vision and comprehensive vision, a comprehensive approach of the systems, something that takes into account all these inequality vectors, because it's not enough. Thank you very much, and I will stay here. Thank you very much, Professor Bizan.
Equality, equity is a very big gap. I mean, when you mentioned that we need to put in place and to enable women to effectively play their roles, so putting in place measures to for the equal pay and for parental leaving, and also from the legal perspective. I mean, this is what we really mean when we talk about equity, no, for all. So now the next question will be to Dr. Bidelli. So from a regional and country perspective, we would like to hear from you. What action can be taken at the regional level to redress the gender gap, considering, I mean, all the challenges that we live in this region, and gender inequality, which remain a critical challenge in the health sector? Over to you, Dr. Miriam.
Thank you, Anna. I think, again, there's a lot that have been said in the answers to the first question in terms of solutions put forward. There is a shortage of human resources and there is unemployment in our region very much. So we need to match these two factors. And there is unemployment among women very much, and we need to match these two factors as well. So there is a need to really think beyond the sector, think in terms of the interconnections between employment sector and the health sector, and to make sure that we find creative solutions at the intersection of these two problems, or I mean, the unemployment problem in the health sector, and the solution that women can offer in terms of bridging the gap for the number of health workers and for health professionals that we actually need to make a system function. And that can happen at national level, it can happen at subnational level as well. And this is very important, I think, to get down to communities when we have this reflection, because nobody can be expected to the impossible, not even women, I would say. So leaving your community is not easy. Some people do that easily, but most people need to stay within their communities because they have families, because they have spouses, because they have children, because they have relationships, networks that are critically important to their balance. And therefore, we need to really make sure that we make sure that these solutions happen at local level, and that we do take decisions that are tailored to local level problems. This is just to add to what has already been said, and that is actually sort of like an additional proposal on top of the institutional approaches that have been already pointed.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's really true. There is no one recipe for everybody. And even at the national level, we may find differences when we go at subnational level, and how it is important always to bring forward this participatory approach, inclusive approach, making sure that everybody, I mean, it's taken into consideration with their needs, with their vulnerabilities, but also with their own resources, I would say. I mean, we are also receiving a lot of positive comments in our chat. Thank you so much for participants for all this encouragement in your comments again. Last question to close this very interesting panel, which I'm so much honored to have the chance to moderate, is for Rupa. Going back to the policy level and to close this panel, what is your call, Rupa, to policymakers in relation to the policy toolkits that should be designed? And how can policy toolkit with feasible policy options be built to promote and support women's leadership in the health workforce? Over.
Great. Thank you, Anna. And it's been too short, too quick, but really wonderful to be with all these colleagues that are just so deeply committed to these issues. Really, the call to action is we have a framework for change. It's 4 action areas to support women's leadership in health and care sectors. We're going to be launching this formally at CSW with the World Health Organization. It will be a World Health Organization global product. And the 4 things we're asking is build a foundation for equality. We've heard it at multiple levels for Dr. Buzian's experience, from Dr. Bigadelli's experience as well in a regional context. We need high impact practices that build the foundation for equality, and governments must create the legal foundation for gender equality. Our elected officials need to, build these policies with communities together, and we need to enable men and women to both be able to work. So this is very much about countries adopting laws and policies that address root drivers of gender inequity, and these gender balances will not equalize on its own. Too often, the narrative is let's keep investing in fixing women and giving women training, but we know that that's not enough. Very highly trained women are leaving the workforce as COVID-19. We are fearful that some countries will roll back decades in employment progress because of what this pandemic has done to the balance of households and communities. So governments in their responding, whether it is their Build Back Better plan or their pandemic response, must really use this as an opportunity to drive the foundation for equality. The second is really removing restrictions on women's rights to work. Too many countries, 90, still have labor laws that restrict what type of jobs women can hold. We really need to catch up with the 21st century, and this cultural change is coming locally, right? It has to be locally driven. The second is address social norms and stereotypes. This has been discussed many times already today, but what I wanted to highlight is targeted campaigns to attract the most underrepresented groups. As Miriam talked about, we can't have the same women that are from the most powerful, privileged backgrounds driving this agenda. It needs to be women at all levels, but also men and other genders. So really have targeted campaigns to attract new talent, diverse talent. And we really need many more of them to enter into the health workforce. That 18 million health worker shortage that WHO is talking about, we estimate this will even get worse after the pandemic. So there are jobs to be filled. We must attract the talent and have targeted campaigns to have underrepresented groups, and which also means bringing men into fields like nursing and midwifery and community health work, so it does not become and remain a feminized place. The third point is really fix workplace systems and culture rather than women. Too often, again, we talk about fixing women, things that women must do, but we really need to think about what are we doing in our workplace and what are we doing in our culture so that women are enabled. They already want opportunities. They already have talent and expertise in many times, and they just don't have the environment. And really making sure there's visible, accountable senior leadership so that there's senior champions for gender equality in the workforce that include progress indicators in their performance. So as we look at getting into leadership beyond the most national level, subnational, regional, making sure that performance indicators look at management in a way, are they achieving gender equality there? Are they having a zero tolerance strategy for workplace bullying and sexual harassment? The health sector has some of the highest numbers of violence, sexual harassment, and bullying. Surveys that have been conducted at least estimate in some countries up to 50% of health workers experience some form of bullying or harassment. And this policy about quotas is often considered controversial, but over and over again, it's the only proven policy. UN Women has made it its flagship policy to achieve gender parity is to have quotas. Targets are great, but we really need to set clear quotas and mandate them, and change happens only once you really have 30% of women in a particular role. So we need to really not just have one woman or tokenistic women, as Miriam said, but really support the women to drive the change.
Thank you, Rupa. Thank you. Sorry,
one last, I'll be very quick.
It was for me, I would listen to you.
Okay. I have to invite everybody to one thing. I'll take 30 seconds.
Sure.
We have launched with the government of France and with WHO, the Gender Equal Healthcare Workforce Initiative. We invite all governments and all partners to join us in this initiative in the Generation Equality Forum.
Thank you so very much. I just want to take the chance to really thank Dr. Miriam, country representative in Morocco for WHO, because I know she has another urgent commitment, and Professor Agnès Buzyn for her present and invaluable contribution, and to you, Rupa. And just, I want to close saying that what you mentioned about not fixing women, it's not about fixing women, but it is about challenging and tackling the root drivers of gender inequality. This, I think, it's the message we should bring away with us. And again, thank you so much for all of your intervention. And I give back the floor to Anna. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much from my side, with all my apologies for this final rush. Honestly, all the input that you share are so interesting and so enriching that we will certainly be happy to share them in our final full report of this event that will be published soon, and we will circulate, of course, among the participants. Thanks again from my side. And before giving the floor to Mrs. Maria Elena de Filipe for the closing remarks to summarize the outcomes of this quite long event, I would just thank again to all the moderators, all the panelists for their contribution, both in the preparatory phase that in the delivery phase of today. Thanks again, and I wish you an International Women's Day to all of you. I give the floor to Mrs. Maria Elena de Filipe. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Thank you. Very, very quick. The panel one about women in business and entrepreneurship and digital economy. The impact of COVID has been very serious on the informal economy, informal workers and tourism, a sector which women are highly represented. However, the pandemic can also a chance for optimism and opportunities for the reform. The economy post-pandemic needs to be genderized. Gender budgeting is crucial. Women's participation in the economy is unsustainability. Low to the tendency on the number to go up is also very low. Maybe the pandemic recovery will be the occasion to improve that and change this dynamic. Paradox, the MENA region has the highest rate of women engineers in the world, and STEM graduate many startups funded by women. In Tunisia, for example, 25%. These women disappear in the workplace. However, the burden of care works falls on women. We need an overall strategy to reinforce and enhance the role of the private sector in the region while fostering entrepreneurship in the region, which is already happening by now. The economy brings a lot of opportunities in the region. However, high is women participation in the engineering, IT, education, digital divide is very big in the region. Of teleworking was also discussed. It can have several implications for women. They conduct more care work and they are more isolated, increasing risk of violence and harassment. However, it also brings opportunity to increase participation in the labor market. Participation, flexibility, better match of demand and supply, time and cost savings. Should not get trapped in this COVID-19 excuse to continue to push to redesign the workplace where networks are more accessible for women were often left out of the clubs. Encourage women to be more present on digital networks. Change organizations to work more horizontal and well suitable for female leadership roles. And leverage communities affect digitalization provides giving women a voice is just one click away. Importance of gather gender disaggregation data to illuminate and inform action, but attention should equally be brought to how this data is used to improve capacities and inform pandemic recovery. For the second panel, we have some notes from our panelists about women in rural areas. The COVID-19 has resulted a wide range of impacts: care work, disruption, public and transport that impacts women in farm working who rely on public transportation, impact on informal economy. Sure that social policies are revised to address the needs of women in the region. Importance of ensuring the women do not miss the agricultural calendar, provide relief packages, reprioritize funds to respond to the key areas and needed to be addressed. Rural areas are not uniform, and women in those areas are diverse, and high degree of complexity makes necessary detailed study. These data will be key to inform policy recommendations and decision-making processes. One can play the key role in developing agri-food systems that are more sustainable. Hence, we need to ensure that they have access to finance. And the last panel in relation with women and the healthcare section, have here that COVID-19 has shed a light on gender inequality in the healthcare sector, especially in the senior and decision-making positions. For public policies that address the root causes that this inequality, addressing cultural and gender stereotypes, putting gender equality at the center. This will help build more resilient healthcare systems and universal healthcare coverage. Women are an agent of change. They are not only consumers and health workers, but agents of change. Problem, women are not valued in this sector. They are seen as vulnerable population instead of as expert and valuable agents in decision making. We need to address these root challenges. Women have been leading reproductive health services would not have been disrupted, also have been made for female bodies, and overall the measures would have been more inclusive. Investing on decent jobs for women does not generate an income, but a benefit for the healthcare sector and for women's economic life and empowerment. Collective action and collective bargaining achieve the agenda and negotiate for the conditions for healthcare workers, especially for women. Using tokenism and rather investing on diversity and structural changes. Encourage women in decision-making positions to facilitate other women's access to leadership, improvement of their work conditions, their voice to push a more progressive agenda. Thank you very much, and I give the floor to Anna Drenjica for the closing remarks. Thank you.
Sorry, thanks a lot, Mrs. De Filippo, for these very focused, well-focused closing remarks. Thanks a lot again. Thanks to everybody for your passion, for following us until now. I hope to see you again very soon in the next UfM events, and the next one will be the one I mentioned at the beginning, the Women Business Forum in July. So again, very, very good International Women's Day to all of you. Thanks again.
Thank you. Bye.